Well, so we are getting the search string here inside our search controller. Now we need to pass this string to our Open Weather Map API so that we can get all of the matching cities. So I'm going to create a service called Weather Service, which will encapsulate all the interaction with Open Weather Map API. I like to write all of my server-side interaction code at one place in a service so that I can reuse it and even inject it anywhere throughout the application. So you can see I have created a separate folder for that called data. So first I'm going to create a module script file, then a module called data. Let's include the file and let's inject it as a dependency in a main module. Next, I'm going to create a service file for weather service and create a service called weather service using a factory function of a module. Then I'm going to return an empty object. Now let's define our service API here inside this empty object. The first function we need is a find function, which will call find by location function. I like to declare the API here on the top like this and details below so that if anyone is referring to this file, we'll get a clear idea of what the service can do by just looking at this object returned by service. Now let's define our find by location function. Here inside this function, we need to send an HTTP request to this URL, which will then return us the weather data for the searched city. So let's store this URL in a variable called URL. And let's collect location as argument here on this function and append this argument to this URL. Next, we need to inject $HTTP and $Q services here inside our weather service. I want to make this function asynchronous so that I will know when weather data has arrived. So let's create the differ object first, send HTTP GET request on the URL, then a success function, and resolve the promise here inside this function, then an error function and reject the promise. Then finally, I'm going to return the promise. Cool. So our first service method is ready. Let's include the file first in our main HTML file. Then let's inject our weather service here inside search controller. Use the service and call the find function, passing search string as an argument. Chain it with the then function, handle the response in a success callback and error in error callback. Let's log the response in success and error in reject callback. Run the application, enter some city name to search. Awesome. Can you see that? We got the array of cities here inside the list array. So I'm going to create a model called cities on my scope object, initialize it with a null value, then let's populate it with the list array from the response. Okay, so we got the weather of cities. Next, let's render it on our user interface.